We have just heard one, if not the most important, familiar and popular parables of Jesus, the story of the prodigal son. It comes from a grouping as the third of three parables about things that are lost and found. First, a sheep, and then a coin, and then a son. Today, I would like to focus our attention on the third parable, and specifically how it has been interpreted in the arts, the visual arts, music, and dance. What? Dance? Yep. Because of its popularity, this parable of the prodigal son has been the topic of much artistic expression, including ballet. But first, let's start with the visual arts. During the Middle Ages, this parable was one of four that most often was depicted by artists, the other three being the Good Samaritan, the wise and foolish virgins, and the rich man and Lazarus. But by the time of the Renaissance, the prodigal son story was by far the standout parable for artistic expression, including the prodigal son in the tavern, him feeding the pigs, and of course the final scene of him coming home. Perhaps the most famous depiction of the homecoming reunion was painted by Rembrandt in 1662, and it now hangs in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. In it we see the disheveled son kneeling at the feet of his father. Is he exhausted? Is he just relieved to be home? His face is hidden from us, buried in his father's stomach. I find the image of the father to be rather disconcerting. While it looks very placid with him placing his hands upon his son's shoulders, there's a surprising lack of energy in the encounter. The exchange between parent and child seems even somewhat stagnant. At least that's my take on it. Others have seen greater energy in this exchange, but I don't see it there. But the stolid attitude of the father is nothing in this painting as compared to the father in another work of art. This time it is the ballet, The Prodigal Son, with music by Sergei Prokofiev and choreography by George Balanchine. It was the last work produced for the Diaghilev Ballet Russe in Paris in 1929. Susan Au writes in her book, Ballet and Modern Dance, quote, adapted from the biblical story, it opens with the prodigal's rebellious departure from home and his seduction by the beautiful but treacherous siren whose followers rob him. Wretched and remorseful, he drags himself back to his forgiving father. And it's this last point that I want to emphasize. Now, I had the unique opportunities to see this ballet performed by the American Ballet Theater in Buffalo at the Shays Theater some 40 years ago. And the highlight of the performance was that the role of the prodigal son was danced by the incredible Mikhail Baryshnikov, who then was in his prime. I can picture it as if it were yesterday. Now, when it came to the final scene of his homecoming, he literally crawled across the length of the stage on his hands and knees, collapsing on his stomach at the feet of his father, who stood motionless, like a statue. The son then gathered up his strength and began to climb up his father's body, who remained immobile. Finally, when he reached the father's neck and put his arms around it, the father lifted him up in his arms, covered him with his cloak, and began to walk away as the curtain fell. Again, like the Rembrandt painting, there was no indication until the very end of any movement of the father towards the son. The final work of art is by Claude Debussy, entitled L'Enfant Prodigue, and called a scène lyrique, a lyrical scene. Conceived as a cantata, it's occasionally been staged as a one-act opera. Premiered in 1884, it won the 22-year-old Debussy the Prix de Rome, giving him a 4-year residency at the French Academy in Rome to further his studies. Now, if our earlier works by Rembrandt and Balanchine went awry of the gospel we heard, in their lack of responsiveness of the father, Debussy takes literary license to a whole new level, in that he conceives another character for the parable, namely the prodigal son's mother. You heard me correctly, his mother. The work opens with her singing a beautiful aria lamenting her son's absence. The father expresses his weariness at her constant thinking about their son. And after a dance by the villagers, the prodigal son returns home, and he and his mother rejoice to see one another again. But then the father appears, and he's not happy at all to see his son. The mother has to convince the father to take him back, and only then, when he agrees, can the three of them praise God. So there we have it, the work of three brilliant artists, Rembrandt, Balanchine, and Debussy, and they all miss the point. In all their depictions of the parable of the prodigal son, the father is nothing like the father in the gospel. Their father is stoic, unbending, and even angry. The father in Jesus' story is the complete opposite. We can imagine him waiting patiently for his son's return, hoping each day would be the day he would see him again. How many evenings did he spend on the front porch just watching the horizon? How many times did he climb the hill behind his house to look down the road in search of his son? How many times did he return home with a heavy heart? And then one day he saw, coming around the bend, over the crest of the hill, what looked like a familiar figure. He was thin, he was haggard, he was barely recognizable, but the father knew in his heart the moment he saw him, it was his son, his beloved son. And what did he do next? Did he stand there tapping his foot, arms folded, waiting for the boy to finally make it back limping with shame and guilt? No, Jesus says, he ran. He ran. He ran and embraced him, kissing him and weeping for joy. And as the son started his little speech, his apology, which he had probably said hundreds, maybe thousands of times on his journey, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer," but the father isn't even listening. He was shouting to his servants, "Quickly, bring the finest robe, a ring, and sandals for his feet." A robe standing for honor, a ring, a sign of authority, and shoes for a member of the family, since slaves did not wear shoes. In other words, he is restored to fullness of life with the Father. Oh, and kill the fatted calf, because we're all going to celebrate. And so we can end here with a sigh of relief, because God will forgive me no matter how badly I screw up. No, that's not the point. Jesus did not tell these stories just to make us feel good. Jesus told these parables to defend himself against the Pharisees' criticism of him associating with sinners. And we're talking not about amateur sinners, but big sinners, those whose whole way of life was opposed to God's law. Racketeers who enriched themselves by defrauding the weak and collaborating with the hated Roman oppressors. Prostitutes, and all those whom society considered the lowest of the low. These were the sinners that Jesus sought out and ate with. Of course, the Pharisees must have smarted to see themselves described in the attitude of the elder brother. Like the Pharisees, the elder brother lacks any degree of sympathy, levels accusations, even false ones, against his brother, and refuses to forgive him or welcome him home. But then suddenly, the parable ends without finishing the story. Did the older son change his mind and join the party? Or did he remain outside, wallowing in the mire of his own pig pen? And then the ultimate question, who are we in the story? Of course, we are all the prodigal son. We have all sinned and gotten lost in the foreign lands of our minds and our hearts. But have we dared to journey home, trusting God, our loving Father, that he will embrace us, heal us, and restore us to life? And if we have come home, have we come to be the older brother or the father? Will we turn away those we judge as unworthy and dismiss those who offend us? Or will we seek out and welcome and restore all those who come, because we see in them what God sees in us?